Good morning to one and all present here. This is the webinar on community physiotherapy research and practice. Today's speaker for the webinar is Dr. Pavithra Rajan. Dr. Pavithra Rajan is a community physiotherapist from India. She completed her master's from Canada and currently she is pursuing her PhD at the Faculty of Medicine and Health, the University of Sydney, Australia. If we are talking about her credentials, she is a postgraduate teaching fellow with the discipline of physiotherapy at the University of Sydney. She has published more than 50 research papers in international peer-reviewed journals, some of which have been used to redesign the community physiotherapy curriculum in India. She is also the sub-editor on textbook for community physiotherapy. Her research interests are community rehabilitation, rural and remote health, musculoskeletal rehabilitation, and evidence-based practice. So we welcome you from the platform of Zoom by Ashok and Rita Patel Institute of Physiotherapy, a constituent institute of Charuset. Over to you, Dr. Pavithra Rajan, madam.
Thank you, Dr. Dave and Dr. Bala, for giving me this opportunity to interact with your students, although virtually this time. I'm going to quickly share my screen. It has the presentation for today. All right. So as Dr. Dave has already mentioned, the topic for today is community physiotherapy research and practice. He's given a brief introduction of me. So I'm pursuing my third year doctoral studies in musculoskeletal health at the University of Sydney, and under the supervision of Dr. Claire Hiller, who has joined us today. She's a senior lecturer with the discipline of physiotherapy at the Sydney School of Health Sciences. My other supervisor, Professor Catherine Refshoggi, should be joining us soon for the presentation today. So moving on, the way I have designed the webinar today is I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey as a community physiotherapist. Then we move on to see what is the current state of community physiotherapy in India. And then I will look into some of the job prospects which are typical as well as atypical in the scenario of community physiotherapy in India. So just a disclaimer, although I introduce myself as a student of PhD at the University of Sydney. What I'm going to present today is some of my own experiential accounts. So any views that are expressed in today's presentation are solely of mine and are not endorsed by the University of Sydney. So let me talk a bit about my journey as a physiotherapy student and now a physiotherapist working in different projects in India. So in 2007, I finished my undergrad studies in physiotherapy at a large government hospital from Mumbai, Sion Hospital. And after completing my undergrad studies, the first job that I took up was that of an ICU physiotherapist at this large private hospital in Mumbai itself. I worked there for about a year, after which I went on to do my postgrad studies in Canada for 3 years. I was funded by the provincial government of Canada grant, which was quite prestigious to get at that time, due to which I extended my master's program by 1 more year. During my postgrad studies, I looked into TheraBand training. I was quite passionate about TheraBands then and even now. That was because while I was working as the ICU physiotherapist, we attended a workshop by Andrew Lepus, who was the sports physio then. So quite passionate about TheraBands then, and luckily I got to work on a research project in Canada as part of my postgraduate studies. So that was my first exposure to research. As we all know, I might even acknowledge that research in India is not as advanced as it is in Western countries. And so this was my first exposure to research, and I seem to enjoy it a lot. So I thought maybe I should explore more opportunities in the field of research. So in 2011, after I finished my postgrad studies in Canada, I came back to India, and this was a happy accident. So I was more motivated to come back and work with communities, and also wanted to look for some research opportunities because that was something new that I'd learned, and I wanted to explore more in that area. So I happened to contact, I'll talk about this more in the job prospects. Maybe it might be of interest for you students on how to go about exploring, different jobs as a community physiotherapist. So I landed up interacting with this founder of this NGO from Gujarat. So I guess my connections with Gujarat go back to about 10 years. So this was my first assignment as a community physiotherapist in India. So as you can see, it came 4 years after I finished my graduation. And we'll talk about why this might be the case with most of us today. So this founder had advertised a position for a volunteer to design the biology curriculum for urban slum children in Gujarat. And although not quite physiotherapy, doesn't sound physiotherapy at all, but I just wanted to do my bit for the community and get to know the communities in India better, especially the underprivileged ones. So I went on and contacted the founder. And when he came to know that I'm a physiotherapist, he offered some physiotherapy projects as a volunteer again. So he came back and said that back pain is on the rise among urban slum women in Vadodara. And also he wanted me to check on the kids of these mothers because there was increased incidence of back pain among the children as well. So this was a very happy accident, which kind of I can say it was a major turning point in my career as a community physiotherapist. So I took up that project, and I'll tell you what happened eventually with that. Then moving on in 2013-14, I got employed as a part-time research assistant. So if you see the 1, 2, 3, fourth and the fifth job, they are around the same years. So the national research officer was a full-time position and the research assistant was a part-time position. So as a part of the research assistant with the Pediatric Oncology NGO in Mumbai, I'm not sure how many of you all are aware of the Tata Memorial Hospital for Cancer Care in Mumbai. So this NGO is attached to that hospital, and they're doing some amazing job with these underprivileged families of cancer survivor kids. And I was happy to get a job as a research assistant. So this was a paid position once a week, and I got to travel to these remote rural communities in northern part of India, and it was a wonderful experience and quite an eye-opener. So the reason why I'm discussing all this is it increased my passion and my commitment towards community physiotherapy in India, and that's how I ended up with what I'm doing today. Next position was that of a National Monitoring and Evaluation Officer Research, as the name suggests. And even if you look at the institute where I worked, it's an Institute of Social Sciences, so absolutely nothing to do with physiotherapy at all. But this position was, you can equal this position to that of a statistician. So all I did was working with large nationwide data on HIV and TB counseling, which was flowing in through different parts of the country, and I had to manage the data. It was the work of a data analyst, but that skills have helped me with the next job, that is of a research scholar on an Indo-Canadian project, which was funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development of the Government of Canada. So as a part of this next job, I was posted for 6 months in Karnataka, and that's in southern part of India. And I was required to travel to rural communities in Karnataka, conduct interviews and focus groups with the recipients of the Integrated Child Development Services. So that's a government scheme in order to improve the health and nutrition of under 5 children. So again, not very physiotherapy, but related to public health and community health in a certain way. And then 6 months later, we were all, so it was a group of us who went to Karnataka, worked on different projects. So my project was on integrated child development services. Then I went back to Canada for 6 months, where we had to do debriefing and work on some publications and have some presentations with the government of Canada. So after that, I embarked on my current position, that is of a PhD candidate in musculoskeletal health at the University of Sydney. This position started in 2017, and I've been working as a postgrad teaching fellow with the discipline of physiotherapy starting this year. So as you can see, my journey has not been that of a very typical physio student or a physiotherapist. And for someone to start their career as an ICU physiotherapist and end up being so passionate about community physiotherapy is quite atypical, I would say. It's not a very common journey that each one of us takes. And over these years, there have been many learnings for me. I've interacted with many physio students from India, in Maharashtra, in Gujarat, and in southern part of India as well. And this has led me to be very passionate about community physiotherapy and try to motivate students and increase the pool of community physiotherapists in India. So having this background, let me move on to the next slide. Now, if you look at my journey so far, the first question that might pop into your mind is community physiotherapy. Have been invited to talk about this, which would mean that I have some knowledge, or your institute has some trust in my knowledge about the field. But definitely that was not my first choice of work, because I went on to work in the ICU. I did not take up any community projects. And secondly, India was clearly not my choice of country for work or study. So now this might be the first impressions for most of you looking at my career profile. And so now the topic for today is community physiotherapy in India. So clearly that doesn't fit my profile. But then what changed? So in the first job that I took up at the private hospital in Mumbai, there was a lot of community contribution that I did. So I actively involved myself in different community education projects. So this was a lecture for creating the awareness about exercise for people living with osteoarthritis in Mumbai, in eastern Mumbai, if I'm not mistaken. And this was a seminar that was held through a NGO that works with the hospital. So it was a CSR project for the hospital. So this was one of the lectures that I took. And there was this other lecture on ergonomics with a multinational company in Mumbai again. So aside from my core job of working in the ICU and treating patients there, these were the other community physiotherapy projects that I took up. Secondly, again, the connection with Gujarat. We had, I don't remember the physio school from Gujarat, but we had about 100 physiotherapy interns come to our hospital during that year. And I helped design some of their student research projects. And so that was another, a little bit of my exposure with research then. Now, the postgraduate program in Canada was a complete research program. So there was no coursework. It was 3 years of research. So, and I had a very good supervisor who was quite student friendly and quite appreciative of the fact that I knew nothing about research. So the kind of courses that I took and the kind of experience that I got there was very valuable. And I think one of the prime reasons for my continued interest in research. So this was our publication. You could find that on Google, I guess. Yep. So I'll tell you briefly about this project. So what we did was the older patients were attending a day hospital at this at Winnipeg in Canada. So that's a city in central Canada. We recruited older adults and tested their ankles. And the velocity training, power and strength training, was done using TheraBands. So my interest, as I mentioned, was in TheraBands then. I got, so the way the research project was designed was, my supervisor is an expert in older adults, and my interest was in strength training and TheraBands then. And that is how we mixed both our interests together and developed this project. Now, this project was funded, as I said, by the provincial government. So it was quite, and it has been presented quite a lot in conferences, local and international. And there's also a publication for you to go and have a look. Now, this might be of interest to most of you all today, especially those in their third and final years who are thinking what to do after that. So that's a common feeling that each one of us gets when you're nearing the end of your program and you're not quite sure which way to go. So I think I have put up some pointers in this presentation today for you to go back and think what might be of interest to you. Now, so I don't want to talk more about this because there are more slides on this, but try to think about different things that you can do rather than doing the same things that everybody else has done. So here's an example of that. So as I said, I went on this website, that is the UN website for online volunteering service. Let me quickly go and show you this website. This is a good area to explore if you're not very sure which way to go with your. So this is the website, this is the web link, and this is an online volunteering service hosted by the United Nations. So if you go down, it talks about the different projects. So this is an international website because it's through the United Nations. Now, if you click on research, you will find different projects, maybe not pertaining to physiotherapy, but just keep having a look on what kind of projects are advertised. And then say, for example, this looks a bit relevant. And then you go down, you have a little bit of information about what the project is. And then you click on apply now and go ahead. So not just this, you also have a section on writing and editing. That's here. Now create a presentation and a handout. So that's going to hone your skills as well on presentation and creating handouts, maybe for your patients later on. So this is a good website to explore. And that is how I began my journey. So let me quickly share my presentation again. So I went on this website after coming back from Canada. And as I said, it was a happy accident. So there was this NGO in Gujarat that wanted a volunteer to design biology curriculum for urban slum children. So I contacted the founder of this organization. And that's when he talked about, back pain, increase in back pain among the urban slum women and their children. And is there something you can do about that? And I grabbed this opportunity. So I applied for designing the biology curriculum, but ended up doing community physiotherapy with this community. So here, what we did was, so I traveled from Mumbai to Vadodara on an overnight express train, reached there, and then we went to, so this is in one of the houses of the urban slum women, where I kind of did an initial, I don't want to call it an interview, neither a focus group, but just a general discussion on what problems they were facing. So there were about, I think, 20 women in a small room then. So just a bit of discussion initially with them. And then we had designed a handout, as you can see in the next picture. a handout on do's and don'ts of what is good for your back and what is not. Since the health literacy levels of these women were pretty low, they were not as educated. So we tried to keep the words to a minimum, just with do's and don'ts. And we just had pictures of, say a woman bending from the back to pick something up from the floor, and someone just bending their knees down, keeping with a straight back. So something like that, do's and don'ts on the same page, so that the women get a reminder on what is best and what is not. This was quite well received by the women, and then this led to the next project of visiting the schools there and running an ergonomic workshop with the children there. So we had a separate one for the girl school children and then the male school children. We used a similar handout, although a very simple one, especially of the different postures that that the children would take in school, like slouching when they are writing, carrying a heavy school bag. There's a lot of research on those lines. So this is what we did after that, and this was again very well received by the school. So the next step forward, what the school did was, during the physical education class, the teachers in the school took this up as as a project on their own in order to reinforce good postures in their children. So this went on, I believe, for a few months, because I came back to Mumbai and then the follow-up was done by the NGO. But then I'm not sure how many of you all got to see my talk. Yes, my talk on Saturday. So it's just not about planning an intervention and executing it, but you also need to evaluate how much impact that project has had on your on your community. So there was no way to do that with this NGO, because firstly, it was a very small NGO. There wasn't a lot of funding. The location of the NGO was quite remote. It was, although Vadodara, but we had to travel a lot in order to reach these communities. So again, going back to the resources limitation that I talked about on Saturday in my previous webinar. So all that comes into play here. So then what we did was, this was my suggestion. I suggested that we should form a research division within the NGO in order to evaluate the work that we are doing. So it's not just about giving a booklet to the school teachers and expecting the students to get better, but we need to go back and check if they've really got better. So again, you could Google this. The name of the NGO is Colors Foundation. And we founded this research wing. Now, Researchy, that has a long history on why we came up with that name, which you'll know in the next slide. But so we founded this, and using volunteers from nearby universities and colleges in Vadodara, we ran few research projects. So we have about 5 publications which have been used by other researchers in India to explore the similar problems with urban slum women and children in other parts of the country. So this is something you can go through. And yeah, so these are some of our publications. So this was with the ergonomic assessment, where we developed a very simple tool, and I trained 2 volunteers online from Mumbai, and they were in Vadodara, and it was just a yes no thing, and how are they supposed to assess the posture. So what we did in this study was, so we did the booklet education, we did the health literacy education among the school children. Then after 3 months of we followed up in order to see how effective this intervention was, using the simple questionnaire. So the 2 volunteers would evaluate each child separately and see if there's any change in the posture. So we had a simple scoring system as well. So this got published in Health Promotion Perspectives. And then I had written, I guess this was just a review on what has been done in the rehabilitation of urban underprivileged children in India. So this was just the review paper. And then, so Colors Foundation, that's the NGO, it just doesn't look at, health. It also runs some small scale industry work with the women. So they are involved in basket weaving and all of that. So there's a holistic model that has been developed by this NGO. So we also published a paper on this model, which was well received. So this is published in one of the conference proceedings. So this was a conference where this paper was accepted. So this is going back and evaluating the work that you've done. So your work doesn't end in identifying a problem and suggesting a solution. You need to go back and evaluate to see whether uh, your intervention has really worked. Now the way forward, so then what happened was, after I think we went back, so this was a 3 months follow-up, the paper that got published. Then we went back at 6 months, and we found that neither the teachers nor the students were quite interested in health education, because they already know. So what next? Like, is there anything else you can do for the children, was the question that we got from the school, and their mothers as well. So then the founder of this NGO is a black belt in karate. So he's very passionate about martial arts, and he's done a lot of reading in martial arts research. And he's found that it's of course it's physically it makes you fit, but also psychologically it helps you. And that's exactly what he wanted with these kids, especially the teenage ones that were kind of getting into the habits you don't want them to. So then what we did to begin with was, I published this review in the International Journal of Therapy and Rehab on what has been done in martial arts practice and how it can be applied to community-based rehab. And Risachi, the name of the research wing, is actually the Japanese word for research, I guess. So this came from the founder, who was really passionate about karate. I think it's a Japanese martial art, and that's how the name Risachi came for our research division. So then I went on and published this review paper and got some information, because I had no idea about how martial arts could be used for these kids and how to evaluate, their psychological health and all of that. So this was a good, I think, a good time invested, where I learned a lot about the effects of martial arts practice and different ways in which we could use for the school children. So the reason why I'm explaining all this is, try to think out of the box. This is the time for you all to develop those skills, or else community physiotherapy can be really uninteresting. Let me be frank with you. So unless you want to try different things, you want to make it interesting, it's very difficult for someone else to show you the way out. So this one got published, and then we even ran, I think, trial using some martial arts forms on these school children, and we did not quite find any difference, but we are still looking into the reasons for that. Maybe it's the sample size or the kind of population that we recruited, etc., etc. But coming from martial arts practice in community-based rehab, it's quite novel to explore. But the reason why I'm sharing is, this is just an example. There are many such examples that you can think of. Now, going over to the pediatric oncology job as a research assistant, that's the fourth job. So mostly my contribution was designing, developing, and implementation of using nationwide data in order to understand the quality of life among these cancer survivors. So as a part of this project, we conducted focus groups with resident families in Mumbai. In this project, an undergrad intern from Harvard University helped us out, and this paper got published in the Harvard Undergraduate Research Journal, I think in 2013. Then an extension of this project. So after conducting the focus group, we realized where there were some gaps, and we wanted to understand better as to what was going on. So what we did was we designed a project, and we traveled to rural underprivileged communities in 4 states. So that was Uttar Pradesh, Jharkhand, Bihar, and Chhattisgarh. So these 4 states, we traveled to these 4 states in order to visit these rural underprivileged families that were living in really rural and underprivileged area. So in order to reach those places, it used to, I mean, we could visit one family a day, or maybe one family in 2 days. So that's how remote and underprivileged they were. So it was very difficult to reach these families. And we went on and conducted one-to-one interviews, and did got some pictorial evidence as well using photographs. And it was quite a nice study, because there were a lot of revelations when we conducted the interviews to see what kind of problems the families face after going back. So when they are with the NGO, when they are with the Tata Hospital, they are looked after very well. But once they go back to these rural areas, which are very difficult to reach, how do they manage, especially with a small child that has just come out of cancer? So that was quite a nice study, and I think it was accepted for presentation at a conference in Canada. Although we couldn't go because of funding issues, but it did get published in their conference proceedings. So another role of mine as a research assistant was mentorship, which I already talked about. So this paper got published in the Harvard Undergrad Research Journal. And yeah, the research publications, we ended up with, I think, a couple of them from this study. Now, this was a very atypical job for a community physiotherapist, to work as a monitoring and evaluation officer in the research wing at Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And we did end up doing some very nice work, very interesting work. It's just that my job was to sit in front of the computer for 8 hours a day and do a lot, and I mean a lot, of data analysis. So initially it was a big challenge for me, because that was totally different to what we do. We are more used to interacting with people and, treating people and talking to people, and all I had to do was sit at a desk 8 hours a day. So initially it was very tough, but once I understood how, and I had a very good manager then, who was quite patient, and he was appreciative of the fact that I did have some research skills which I could use for this position, but not all of it, and not to the extent that the project demanded. So this was quite a unique role, but the learnings that I got from this position was, it helped me appreciate research more, because just with the data coming in from throughout the country, unless you do some analysis and try to find out what's actually happening with the intervention or your program, there's no point of doing the intervention, right? So this was one of the papers that got published in the Indian Journal of Social Work, which is a publication by the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. So this was a really neat job. And I have to tell you, I was done with this job after 1.5 years, because it was too much for me, not something I think I was made for, but it did help me in certain ways. Community contribution, going over to the next job, this was really interesting, quite different, nothing to do with community physiotherapy, but a lot to do with community health. So this was funded by the DFET, Government of Canada. So as a part of this program, as I already mentioned, we got to work 6 months in India. So I was posted at the Institute of Social and Economic Change in Karnataka. That was again not in the city of Bangalore, but quite far away. So again, I wouldn't say a rural area, but a semi-urban area. And so my job, along with one more research scholar, was to visit the Government of Karnataka office in Bangalore in order to get data about the ICDH. So it's the Integrated Child ICDS, Integrated Child Development Service. So that's a service, as I said, is provided for under 5 children in order to improve their health and nutrition, because the mortality rate of under 5s is really high in India. So they wanted to have a service in order to reduce the mortality of kids in that age group. So there was a lot of data that was collected about this ICDS program, but there was no evaluation that was done. Again, going back to the evaluation part. And I had the privilege of traveling to rural Karnataka this time in order to conduct interviews with the stakeholders. So it was not just with the families and the children, but also with the local district officials who and the kinds of problem they faced running this program. So after finishing 6 months in India, I got to go back to Canada for 6 months. So it was mostly for debriefing, writing out the publications and book chapters, whatever, and having meetings with the government of Canada to see if this project helped in any way. So this was quite, again, I guess this was a quite interesting role for me because we got 3 working papers in a matter of 6 months. I had a really good mentor who helped me with this. And this was all data on economics again. So although community health, but it's all economics, like looking at how much money was spent and how much money was invested, et cetera, et cetera. So essentially a cost-effective analysis of a lot of data. So it was a different learning in itself. So as you can see, sorry, the first working paper that got published was a review paper. So that's usually you would begin research in an area that you're not very familiar with. So we started off looking at what are the interventions for improving the child and maternal health and nutrition in South Asia, and then how different were things in India, and how different could we do things in India. So that was the first paper. So you're starting from a very broad topic. Then you go on. Then we went on to see the ICDS services in India to see what's actually happening. And we looked at it in different parts of the country. So from South Asia came down to India. And then this last working paper and I think the second one got published as a book chapter. Yeah, the second one, the Subnational Review, got published as a book chapter. And ICDS in Karnataka was the analysis that we did. So and then this report, the final one, was submitted to the government of Karnataka as an evaluation paper on the ICDS services and how well they could improve the services. So this is typically how you would do research. So going from a very broad area, coming down to, so this was South Asia, then you come down to India, and then you come down to Karnataka. So our area of interest, or our state of interest, was Karnataka, and that's how we came down to Karnataka. Now, probably I talked about this enough, but just a quick slide on this. So how did this happen? So as you can see, I'm one of the sub-editors on this book, and Dr. Bharti Bellare, she is my mentor and was my undergraduate professor of physiotherapy. So she's a community physiotherapist, and one of the primary reasons for my continued interest in community physiotherapy, along with other professors of mine from Sion Hospital. So how this happened was, you guys would already know this, but Dr. Pala and his team organized an international conference on community physiotherapy and in public health. And I was one of the invited speakers then. So it was a privilege visiting ARIP for the first time then. And at that time, at that conference, there was these many experts in the field who had come for an invited talk or for a presentation. And that's when we got authors in order to write this textbook. So this textbook has about 35 to 40 authors from different parts of the country. And since it was too much to be published in one book, this was published as a series of a couple of books. And recently, this book has been endorsed as a textbook for community physiotherapy by the Maharashtra University of Health Sciences. So I'm not sure if you guys have already got a chance to go through the book, but there are some interesting topics for you guys, especially the later years in undergraduate program and the postgraduate students. So this was a neat, I think a good contribution to community physiotherapy in India that I could do. And the best part about this book was I was in Australia then, right, from 2015 to 2017, pursuing my PhD studies and doing other stuff here. And the other two editors were in India. So it was quite a challenge for us with the time difference and, juggling between, contacting the authors, having meetings with the publishers. So it was quite a challenge for 2 years for us, but glad that this finally came out and it's being appreciated as a textbook endorsed by MUHS. Now, let me quickly tell you about my last job. That's my PhD candidate at the University of Sydney. So this is my broad PhD topic. So as you can see, my current topic has parts of what I have been doing in the past decade. So chronic back pain, in fact, that was my first community physiotherapy project with urban slum women and children in Gujarat. Then community, always been passionate about that, community physiotherapy, and culture, of course, because culture plays a very important role in the way you perceive not just health, but almost everything in life. So person from the Indian culture would perceive things differently as say someone from the Western culture, right? And in India, it's also different parts of the country, right? So someone from Maharashtra might perceive things differently compared to someone from, say, northern part of India or southern part of India. Right. So this is my PhD topic, and I'm quite glad to have spent 3 years of my time on this topic because quite passionate about this, and I've ended up doing some really wonderful work thanks to my supervisory team, especially Dr. Hiller and Professor Refshogi. So quickly going through my PhD and where I stand today. So firstly, as I said, you start from something broad. If you want to know what's already being done and what more you can contribute to the field. So firstly, I did a systematic review. Probably the postgraduate students might know about this. I'm not sure if the final year and the third year undergrad students know about the systematic review, but you could always go back, Google and check what a systematic review is. So we conducted a systematic review on community interventions for chronic musculoskeletal health conditions in rural and remote areas. Now, the words that I'm talking at the moment will seem very familiar because that's what I've been passionate about in the past 10 years. And so it was wonderful to do this review in its first place, although there were some challenges, like writing up and doing the analysis and trying to understand what the evidence is telling. But in itself, it was quite a good learning experience. So that's how you usually begin. If you don't know where to begin, just go and check for evidence that's already published and see where you can take that evidence from. The next one was an adaptation study. So there were two questionnaires in English. So most of the questionnaires, unfortunately, or fortunately, are available in English. And in order to do studies in ethnic minorities, that's what they're called here, ethnic minorities, or culturally and linguistically diverse groups. So linguistically diverse means they don't speak the same language, right? They're linguistically diverse. So so my study is more about culture, beliefs about back pain. So we were interested in adapting and validating back pain questionnaires into Marathi. Now, why did we choose the language of Marathi? That's because we were in the process of running parallel projects in Maharashtra as well, in rural and remote communities in Maharashtra. Although we got the grant quite late into the project, but this was something in the pipeline that we had already planned. So validation study, and I believe ARIP is doing a wonderful job with cross-cultural adaptation and validation studies of different questionnaires in Gujarati. I guess some of you students might also be working on these projects. So I wouldn't stress much on the process and how it's done, but it's important because if your patient is not able to understand English, how are you going to evaluate your program? Say you're giving an exercise program for the knee, for the back, say for the back, for a particular patient, and then you want to evaluate how good the intervention was. Now, if you give your patient an English questionnaire and the patient doesn't understand English, you could probably translate then and there or interpret then and there and get answers from your patient, but how reliable would that be? Because the next patient who comes in, you might interpret and translate it in a different way. So if you already have a questionnaire that's translated into, say, Gujarati, you can just hand it over to your patient or read out the questions to your patient. So that's more reliable. So this kind of studies are very important, especially in an Indian setting where we have, such diversity, such rich diversity in languages and culture. So these kind of studies are very important, and ARIP is doing a wonderful job with these validation studies. So that was my second study. This third study, quite evidently, was to understand what are the beliefs about back pain among Indian migrants living in Sydney. So this was a survey which we did using the back beliefs questionnaire in English. So assuming that most of the migrants who come to Australia have basic understanding of English. So there was a survey which we conducted with about approximately 400 Indian migrants living here. And there were some interesting findings, but the nature of a survey is such that you get good information, but you can't explore uh, uh, why you get certain responses and why your community is different to what is already published or known in that field. So this led us to the next study, which was a focus group study with Indian migrants speaking Hindi. So we were specifically interested in Hindi speaking Indian migrants living with pain here. The reason we chose the language of Hindi was it's one of the, I think it's amazingly, surprisingly, it's among the top 10 languages that are spoken in Australia. So, the findings of this study could be generalizable. Yeah, I got it right this time. To a larger part of the Indian population. So that's why we ended up doing this study. And this is, as the name suggests, a very qualitative study. I must say that I've enjoyed doing the focus groups. They were a challenge. So it's not very easy to do focus groups because you need to know how to lead a focus group, and you really don't know what kind of answers would come. So you can't have a template like a survey and ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, because depending on what response you get from your participants, your next question will change. So it was a good experience, a really good learning experience in order to run these focus groups, and an even richer learning experience analyzing the data. Because as you might be aware, or you might have heard these terms of quantitative and qualitative research, there are two different types of research methodologies. So quantitative is all about numbers, while qualitative is trying to understand the richness in the data. So very different kinds of analysis that happens when you do, but there's a lot of mixed methods research that's going on where researchers prefer doing both together because it ends up getting a very good understanding of what's happening. So this was the last study where we looked at what is actually going on with chronic back pain experience in this migrant community. So this is just a brief overview of how my PhD has grown over these 3 years. And this is a recent publication that we have in the Journal Disability and Rehab, and that's the validation and the reliability study of the questionnaires in Marathi that I was talking about some time back. Now, over these years, let's say over the past 10 years, as you can see, I've been in different roles that are very atypical for a community physiotherapist. Well, some of them are definitely, they might be related to community health, but definitely not physiotherapy. So what have I contributed as an Indian community physiotherapist over the past decade? So as already mentioned by Dr. Dave, I've had some publications on community physiotherapy in India. I guess about 10 or 11 of them were some of the suggested readings for the students for the webinar today in order to just have a basic understanding of what I'm going to talk today. So that was good. And as already mentioned by Dr. Dave, some of these publications have been used to redesign curriculum in the state of Karnataka. So that's how powerful research can get. So if the kind of research that you're doing is creating such an impact as a redesign in the curriculum, that's really comforting. That feels really good that your research is being put to good use. The next point is the textbook on community physiotherapy, which has been accredited by MUHS. So it's a compulsory reading now for all the undergrad and the postgrad students in the state of Maharashtra, which is quite reassuring, given the kind of efforts that have been put in and the hours that we have worked in order to produce such a rich document on community physiotherapy. So that's really reassuring. Invited speaker in community physiotherapy, I guess my connection or my relationship with ARIP began then in 2015. And this was when I was invited as a speaker on community physiotherapy. So that was a very, I guess, a very fruitful event that happened in my life. And there's been a lot of I've been coming back to ARIP to interact with you students. I don't know how many of you all have interacted with before, because I think it's been 2 years now since I've visited you guys, but it's always been good. And I think one of the papers that I shared in your suggested readings is the survey that I conducted with the undergrad students. I think it's the student perspective paper. I think the seventh or the eighth in the list that was probably shared with you. And the one, the survey study with the postgrad students has just been accepted and should be out soon. So I should be able to share that with ARIP once it gets published. And then I'm still holding the position of head of research at Colors Foundation, although we're still struggling to get funding and volunteers interested, because it's a very small NGO with a very big dream. So again, lack of resources, manpower, that's kind of deterring some of the projects when I'm still having that connection with the NGO. So community physiotherapy researcher in India, although I've gone into areas not usually explored by physiotherapists and not explored by community physiotherapists for sure. I'm really glad to be back as a community physiotherapy researcher in India, because that's exactly where my passion and my interest lies. And finally, as I said, the undergrad and the postgrad curriculum for the physiotherapy students in Karnataka is undergoing a redesign based on some of my publications. So that feels really good. So as you can see, although you are not employed in a mainstream community physiotherapy job, you can still contribute to the profession if you're really passionate and interested in doing so. So that was the reason for all this talk all this while, that try to think out of the box, because finding a job as a community physiotherapist in India is not easy. You might end up with an academic job, that is a teaching job. Research jobs quite difficult to find in India, I would say. But if you try to get associated with community health or public health, that in itself will hone your skills as a community physiotherapist. So moving on, so these are findings from the studies that I've done. So as I said, I have I'm lost in the number of students that I've interacted with over the past decade. I mean, the physio students in India, but that's I've interacted with a lot of students, and depending on the surveys and the interviews that I've had with them, some of which have been published, it's very clear that community physiotherapy is not the first choice of study. So it's not preferred by most of the students to take up this area of specialization. The foremost reason is lack of awareness. So we really don't know what community physiotherapy is. I mean, there's no definition for community physiotherapy, right? The textbook that we published, that I talked about a few slides ago, that was the reason for writing the textbook was that, because there's no textbook for community physiotherapy in India before we published that textbook. So unless you have some resources to understand what is the role of a community physiotherapist, or if I want to take up this area of specialization, what am I signing up for? Um, there's not going to be many students who are interested in taking up this area of specialization. So lack of awareness was the foremost reason why students did not prefer to take community physiotherapy as a study choice. Now, this research or these findings are based on the research that I've been doing for the past 10 years. I'm very glad to let you know that things have changed drastically now. With institutes, there are some very progressive community physiotherapy colleges in Maharashtra that I know of, and ARIP is doing a wonderful job with community physiotherapy, because you guys are nested in the middle of these wonderful rural communities in Gujarat. So there's a lot of work that you can do. Try to get involved in the different projects that run at ARIP, and Dr. Bala and his team, Dr. Dave, as well, are doing a wonderful job in trying to, intrigue the interest of their students in this. So if you go through the paper on student perspectives, in the suggested readings, if you read the discussion, I've talked about a bit on those lines. So lack of awareness, lack of motivation. So let's be very frank. So when you take up a job, yes, you want to do something for the society, you want to do something for the community, but then you also want to earn your bread and butter, right? So that's a motivation in order to take up a job, right? You've invested so much in your education, might as well get some returns. And with community physiotherapy, if you're working with NGOs, if you're working with social science organizations, the kind of monetary returns that you get is not as much as working in a, say, a hospital or an ICU setting. So definitely there would be some lack of motivation in order to take this up as your first choice of study. Maybe later on, when you're quite established and you've done what you needed to do, and then you go back to this profession, that's a different thing. But taking this up as your first choice of study is not quite heard of. And one of the reasons is lack of motivation. So these are actually the answers that I got from the student surveys. I'm not making these up. There's no future if you take up community physiotherapy as a study choice, because you really don't know what you're going to do. You have seen your seniors take up jobs as an academician, like a teaching job, but beyond that you don't see what people do in the industry, right? So there's no future. These were some of the answers by most of the students. Lack of mentors. So I was really fortunate to have mentors who were quite knowledgeable and interested in promoting this profession. And probably that's one of the major reasons why we are having this webinar today. But if you don't have mentors who can give you, guide you in the different avenues that you can take, or different areas that you can explore with community physiotherapy in India, you can't be confident that you'll end up having a good career with this study choice. So that's another problem. Now, as a work choice, so you finish your undergraduate studies, and undergraduation, you really don't have a specialization. So when you come out with, your master of many skills. It's only in your postgraduate that you kind of narrow down and become a specialist in one field. So for the third and the final year students, community physiotherapy is a work choice. Like you finish your undergrad studies in physiotherapy, and then you would look into working in a hospital. Maybe you look into working in a hospital, or maybe take up some position at a teaching institute. But how do you work as a community physiotherapist? Like, what is the job title? There's no title like community physiotherapist in India, right? There's no title of community physiotherapist. There's a title of lecturer in community physiotherapy, right? So what do you do? Why don't students prefer to work as community physiotherapists? Again, lack of awareness. You really don't know what job you have to do as a community physiotherapist. If you don't know what to do, then definitely you're not motivated to try that area. Not rewarding monetarily, that I've already mentioned. And it's a difficult profession. Like If you see in most of my slides, I've talked about traveling to rural and remote communities in India and how it takes 2 days to visit one family and, away from the city and all of that. So it's not easy. I mean, but the better choice would be to, sit in an air conditioned clinic, and the patient walks into your clinic and you have to treat the clinic, rather than visiting these, far away, in the middle of nowhere communities, and you're also risking your safety. Well, there's no funding to do that, and there's no motivation to do that. So it is perceived as a very difficult profession in that regard. Again, lack of mentors to kind of direct you into what exactly needs to be done. Community physiotherapy is a work choice. But so these are the reasons why students do not prefer taking up community physiotherapy as a profession. But the general view about community physiotherapy, surprisingly, is that it's a service profession and it's rewarding emotionally. So it's a good thing to do. So it's good to work as a community physiotherapist because you have so much of opportunities, so many opportunities to give back to the society, to contribute to these underprivileged rural and remote communities where the need is the most. If the patient is able to walk into your clinic, that means at least he has some resources which is helping him to gain access to the healthcare system. But imagine someone who's living in rural Bihar, which takes about, from Bombay, I had to do, say, if I had to take a train, it would take me 2 nights to reach Bihar, that is Patna, the capital city. And from Patna, I have to hire a car. And that's going to go on for like 8 or 10 or 12 hours in order to reach that family. So if that family has an issue, imagine coming to the city and accessing healthcare services. They need an investment of a day, not just of time, but also of resources. So definitely, if I'm going to go and do something for the families there, I feel good. I feel good that, this family is so underprivileged, it cannot come and access the healthcare services. So let the healthcare services, that is me, go and help them. So definitely it's a service profession. It's viewed very positively. So the general view about community physiotherapy is, yes, it's a great profession, but I don't want to do it. Right, so that's kind of the sense that I got after interact. So this is both the undergraduate and the postgraduate ones. Now I've just drawn a figure on the major findings from the study. So it's like a vicious cycle, right? So there is lack of sufficient pool of community physiotherapists, because of which there's lack of awareness and motivation about the profession in general. So whether it's a study choice or a work choice. And then there's lack of sufficient numbers of community physiotherapists. So there's no availability of mentors, and there's no sufficient pool and lack of mentors. And a mentor can really change your life. So I've been really fortunate in every point of my life to have really good mentors. So in undergraduate studies, I had some really good mentors, whom I'm in touch with even after a decade, and seek their advice on various professional aspects. My mentor from Canada, my postgraduate, my master's of science supervisor, she was a wonderful lady who was so ethical. So I learned a lot from her, just not the research skills, just not the knowledge about research, but other things in life as well. And right now, my mentors, Dr. Claire Hiller and Professor Catherine Refshoggi, uh, are teaching me so many things. So your learnings don't end with your education. So try to keep in touch with your mentors. Try to keep in touch with people who really inspire you, because that can take you a really long way, right? So how do we change this vicious cycle? Because this is what I've been seeing for the past years in India. The first survey that I conducted, the first paper that I published in this regard, I think, I don't know when now, but probably in 2011 or 2012. So it was just a review paper on the community physiotherapy in Western India, I guess. I think that was also a suggested reading for today. And you would see that these points being mentioned then, and now I'm talking 10 years. after that paper got published or after that work was done, and we seem to be stuck in the same cycle. So there has to be a way out if we want to bring up the profession, right? So these are some suggestions on how we could do that. So let's just take out lack. We have to take out the word lack from this profession, from our profession, and we need to ensure that there are sufficient number of physios interested of working in this profession. Now, you guys are the future of the profession. You guys can decide which way to go. I'm just here to provide you options to which way you want to go. So we need to ensure that there are sufficient physios who are interested and working in this field. Secondly, now if that happens, what would happen is there would be improved awareness and motivation among the students, right? So if there are sufficient number of people working in this field, students would be more interested because they know which way to go. They have a mentor to show them the direction, right? So there would be improved awareness and motivation, not only among the students, but also among the staff. And then there would be increase in the number of qualified mentors. So once that happens, so more students getting interested in this profession, we have sufficient pool, and that sufficient pool is going to increase the number of qualified mentors in the profession, and that in turn is going to increase the number of students who are interested in the profession. So how do we go about achieving? So I've mentioned a few examples here, but you can think of others as well. So increase in incentives for community physiotherapists, well, increase in funding, increase in collaboration. So there's a slide on collaborations. I'll talk about that later when we come to that slide. Also increase in the number of PG positions. So earlier when I was doing my undergrad studies, there were hardly any students who would take up postgraduate studies in community physiotherapy. There would be many taking up in musculoskeletal health or orthopedic rehab, even more in neuro. But in community, I would hardly see anyone do that. And I think at that time, of course, I'm talking about Maharashtra. I may be wrong, but this was my general impression about the postgraduate studies then. I think you could just choose which area you wanted to specialize. So there were no specific number of seats um, uh, for allotted to each specialization. So this is one of the way where we can ensure sufficient pool and increase in incentives. So increase funding. So I was recently, a few months ago, having a conference call with one of the professors from Karnataka, and he was talking about how there's a lot of funding that is in place by the government of Karnataka for physiotherapists, which was quite amazing. I haven't even heard about that in happening in India, and I was quite surprised to see that. And the this professor was telling me that physios don't apply for funding. So it's not that there are no incentives. It's that we are not taking the initiative to apply for these incentives, to apply for this funding. So he said, I applied for this project and he's got a huge grant to do it now. And he's doing a wonderful job with that funding. Trying to, it's related to chest. I think it's related to tuberculosis in Karnataka or something like that. The community of, these TB patients, improve their access to the healthcare system. But so keep an eye for funding options and try to access these fundings. So I think funding is available, is what I think, at least at now. Probably that was not the case many years ago, but try to access this funding and try to develop good projects, try to increase collaboration. So when you do a collaborative study, there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of sharing of knowledge. So that way you would also improve your knowledge. It's not just about having publications or doing working as a community physiotherapist. It's also about constantly improving your knowledge about the profession. So these are some two ways in which we could improve the number of community physiotherapists. Now, in order to improve awareness and motivation, try to attend conferences. I think ARIP is doing a wonderful job in that regard. I had the privilege of attending the international conference in 2015, but I must say that ARIP is one of the few institutes, physio institutes, that quite progressive and innovative in their learning and teaching strategies. So make use of that. Make use of. I'm really glad that you took time to attend the webinar today. So try to attend such webinars. I mean, given the COVID situation, there's a lot of online learning that's being opened. Some of them are even free, so try to access those services. Attend seminars like these, or other ones that are being organized by ARIP. Go to invited talks where you can understand. So there's someone with a lot of expertise or passion in that field that's that's sharing their knowledge. So that's a nice way to gain knowledge as well. And of course, textbooks and your suggested readings for your program, and increase in collaborative projects. So that's very important in order to understand what's happening in the world or what's happening in different parts of the country. So I have worked extensively in Maharashtra because I'm basically from Maharashtra, and I've got the privilege of working in Gujarat as well through this NGO that I talked about and through ARIP. So there's a lot of learning that I'm getting in the two states. And now I'm doing a bit of work in southern part of India as well, especially Karnataka. So there's a lot of learning that I see, and there's a lot of similarities, of course, between the three states in India, but there are also some wonderful differences in the way things work, in the way something will work in Maharashtra, but maybe not in Gujarat. So there's a lot of fun. We did a comparative study through this NGO where we looked at school children with back pain in Maharashtra and school children with back pain in Gujarat, and there were some nice striking differences that we have observed. So it's wonderful, not just knowing people in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, but also improving your knowledge in how things can be different in different parts of the world and the country. So increase in the number of qualified mentors, so cross country and cross continent collaborations. Again, as I said, that will expose you to different knowledge and different working styles, which is very important, I guess, to improve the flexibility in your working style. And incentivized positions. So it's good to work as a volunteer. I still do a lot of voluntary work, and I think that's very important for me, at least. That's a way of contributing to the community, I guess. Not just volunteering in India, but in other parts of the world where I have worked as a voluntary editor for a book on economic development in Africa, for which our team won the United Nations award as well. And then teaching underprivileged kids in India the language of English through Skype. And this was another project that I was awarded the United Nations Volunteering Award. So a lot of, not just as volunteers, but also incentivized positions, like, the part-time research assistant. So that was about 8 hours a week with the Pediatric Oncology NGO. And that it was not a high-paying job, but it was it used to take care of my travel, I would say, and it also improved my knowledge about these rural communities in northern India, because northern India was not an area that had explored, and that was I was wanting to see what's different, in rural northern India, and since I have exposure in rural western India and now southern India as well. So that was quite a neat way to learn and gain knowledge, right? So these are some ways. So I'm just, this is something that's um, something that came to my mind, and that's been in my mind to share with you. So there are definitely different options as well of the way in which you could improve the numbers, improve your awareness, motivation, etc., etc. But these are just some pointers. All right, so some strategies, especially for you students, the PG ones, you guys have already, probably thought about this and then embarked upon your postgraduate study program. But for the undergraduate ones, in the year 3 and year 4, it's never too late to start. I mean, it's always good to wait until your final exams are done, and there might be a bit of time between getting your final year results and going on with. I would say the best time to start looking for employment, or at least thinking about options on what you want to do, is now. So try to explore areas. If you don't know which way to go, you have wonderful mentors at ARIP, Dr. Bala, Dr. Dave, and the community physiotherapy team at the institute. So talk to them, see what options you can access. Read a lot. There's a lot of information you can find on Google. Try to connect with people, not just in India, abroad. If you go to different university sites, you can find the email addresses of different physios, different researchers, and try connecting with them. So I would say start now. If you're looking to end up with look if you're not really sure what to do, the time to start is now. And then the next point that I've mentioned, tie-ups with local government and research institutes to enhance employment opportunities. So when you tie up with local government and research institutes, you are being part of real world projects. So say for example the Karnataka project that I had with the integrated child development services, that was quite real world, to see this big project that's being developed by the government of India and being implemented in Karnataka. How good is it? Is it achieving the aims that it was designed for? So try to look into tie-ups with local government and research institutes. And I think ARIP is doing a good job in that regard. I think they already have a tie-up with the Indian Institute of Public Health, if I'm not mistaken. So that's a neat way to expose the students to different kind of working style, although in the same related arena of public health, community health. So that could be a neat way to motivate the staff as well as students to work with these different community organizations. See, it's not that everybody, each one of us today is going to end up working as a community physiotherapist. It's just for you to look into that option to see if it's something that would interest you. So unless you try certain things, you wouldn't know if it interests you. Say, for example, if 10 years ago, when I finished my undergraduate studies in India, I had no clue about research. And today, 10 years after I finished the undergraduate program, I am completing a PhD degree. So a PhD is completely research. So it's a complete research degree. So the transition that I've done from being a clinician, or the kind of learnings that I've got, is to be a clinician, to coming to this level of being a researcher and talking about research and having these publications and this passion for research. That's because I've tried different opportunities. So it's not that you would end up being a researcher or you would end up being a community physiotherapist, but it's more about trying to see whether you like it or not. Unless you try, you wouldn't know if you like it or not, right? So try to get involved in these different projects. Might not be related directly to community physiotherapy, but at least you'll get a taste of how things can work. Now, probably the most interesting segment for the students, just being mindful of the time. I think we are doing well. So the job prospects, the employment options for especially for the undergraduate students. Now the conventional ones, the typical jobs that you might take after you finish your undergraduation. I'm not trying to you know uh, put down or pull down this side of conventional jobs. That's what we all do. That's what I did. So it's not something good or bad. It's just something that I've put up, and something for you guys to think about, whether this is the way you want to go, or there are some other options which you could try. So conventional jobs, so working in a hospital, that's exactly what I did. After finishing my undergraduate studies, I joined a large private hospital in Mumbai as an ICU physiotherapist. So that's exactly what I did. Pursue postgraduate studies in India, that's not something I did, but definitely I did this. Pursue postgraduate studies abroad, I went to Canada. So I was quite conventional after I finished my undergrad studies and took the conventional way of employment option. Now the atypical ones, which I have learned over these years, is working in the social science sector. So after coming back from Canada, I volunteered to work with this NGO and I really enjoyed the social science sector. So it's not hardcore health services like you would find in a hospital or a clinic, but it is definitely related to health. So it was more in the public health or the social science sector. So that's one area you could explore. And working as a research assistant on community health or physiotherapy projects. I trust ARIP is doing some wonderful research. So that's what should I say? It's a privilege for you students to have that option locally. When I was doing my undergrad physio, of course, I have three publications from my undergraduate physio, a final year project, and I think no, a final year project and two projects in my internship. So I had a taste of research then, but it's only after going to Canada that I realized what actually research was and how interesting it could be. So this is an option you could explore. Like if there's a PG student, a postgraduate student, and who's looking to help with recruitment or, running a trial or, getting some patients to fill some questionnaires. So you could volunteer to help with the research project just to understand if that is something that might be of interest to you later on. So these are some conventional ways of going and some unconventional ways for the undergrad students. For the postgrad ones, again, you finish your postgraduation in, say, orthopedic rehab or musculoskeletal health, and you join, an orthopedic clinic as a specialist physio, or you go back to the hospital and work in the orthopedic ward, again as a specialist ortho physio. Work in academics, yes, I guess nowadays uh, you need your postgraduate degree in order to teach in India. So working in academics, yes, that's one area probably most of us end up doing after finishing post-graduation. Pursue doctoral studies, whether in India or abroad. Nowadays, doctoral studies, I think, are the importance of doctoral studies is increasing in India, where I think institutes require you to have a, I mean, not require is not the word, would prefer someone with a PhD degree in academics. So that's another way to go. The unconventional ways, again, you could work in the social science sector as a specialist physiotherapist. So now look, when I talk about NGOs, it doesn't have to be communities, it can also be orthopedic. So I came across this NGO in northern part of India, very close. It was a beautiful location where this NGO was. I think Shimla or some place like that. It was really beautiful. And this NGO is working with the mountain women, and they were looking to find solution for chronic back pain for these women. And I tried a lot. I mean, I spent an entire year trying to get some funding, for the travel or designing a study and all of that. I think this was the time when I was working at Tata Institute, but somehow that didn't work with that NGO. But yes, so that's something you could do. So it doesn't have to be community. It can also be back pain or, knee pain and, those kinds of things. So if you're working in, if you're finishing your postgraduate studies in orthopedics or musculoskeletal rehab, you could also work with the NGO as a specialist orthopedic physio. Again, working as a research scholar, so no longer a research assistant, you get to work as a research scholar. So you would say you finish your your postgraduate research project on a particular topic, and then you can work as a research scholar uh, in research institutes on the same same specialization or different specializations. Now, this is something that's coming up, and I think it's very important, not just for getting publications or knowing people, but it's also for improving your knowledge and your learning. Uh, and as I said, it doesn't stop after you finish your undergraduate or postgraduate studies or even PhD. In my case, learning is a continuous process in life, and that's how you remain interested and passionate in your profession, I feel. So cross-country research projects, so collaborative research between two different universities or two different organizations. An example of a cross-country research project in my case would be my individual project with the NGO in Gujarat, or the curriculum design project with this physio school in Karnataka. So that's cross-country research. It's happening within the same country, or between two different universities within the same country, right? So if there's a big project that's going on, say you're looking at, I'll give you the example of chronic back pain, because that's my current topic of interest. So looking at chronic back pain in urban slum children in Maharashtra, Gujarat, and Karnataka. So there are three different universities or three different research bodies that are involved. So it's like a cross-country research project, because it's happening within India, but different states of India. Cross-continent research projects. So a good example would be, so I have put this up first. So this was the grant from the Office of Global Engagement that was awarded to Professor Catherine Refshoghi, Dr. Claire Hiller, and myself to work in remote villages in Maharashtra. So that's an example of a cross-continent research, because it's so India, continent of Asia, and Australia, so different continents working on a project. And another example of this would be the grant from the government of Canada, which was awarded to me in order to work in the remote villages in Karnataka. So that's an Indo-Canadian project, so between India and Canada. All right. So these are some examples of collaborations. I mean, too early for you guys to jump into such collaborations, but keep an ear and keep an eye open for information on such collaborations. So I think ARIP already has a collaboration with a university in Malaysia. So if there's any, collaborative work going on, keep your eyes or ears open, interact with your team of, teaching staff or your research staff at the institute. And if you have some friends outside of Gujarat, in Maharashtra, or maybe northern part of India or southern part of India, keep an eye for such projects. It's not just, as I said, it's not just about getting a publication or a textbook, but just getting to know people, and the sharing of knowledge, and um, uh, keeping up to date with your knowledge on what's happening in different parts of the country or the world. This is a unique position. Now, India, I guess, is called the diabetes capital, or it's called the diabetes and the obesity capital, I guess, because the number of cases of diabetes and obesity and hypertension, the lifestyle related disorders, are on the rise in India, which is very sad to see that. But health promotion and prevention, because of the increase in non-communicable diseases, is on the rise. So that's an area where we could contribute a lot, I feel. So a position like a health promotions officer or a manager. Now, if you go online and try to check job roles like this, you are not going to find that in India. But it is through talking with people, and organizations, or if you're interning at an organization, keep your eyes and ears open for such positions. So usually such positions are not advertised openly, but the job role is somewhat similar, right? So with the knowledge that you gain in your physiotherapy undergrad or your postgraduate studies, you could do a wonderful job in health promotion and prevention. And that again comes back to community physiotherapy, right? So it's an area of community physiotherapy and public health professionals. So the difference between public health and community health or community physiotherapy is the public health professionals. My exposure with the public health professionals in India has been that they are more into the epidemiology, or how many people have back pain, or how many cases of diabetes are coming up, and all of that. But the prevention aspect, we are quite empowered, or we are quite knowledgeable in doing that. So that's an area that could be explored. And it doesn't, so the job role is health promotions officer. It doesn't talk about community physiotherapy at all, but even essentially it's the same. Research officer. So as you can see, I've worked as a research assistant, research scholar, research officer as well. So the reason to take up such positions is to understand how useful the position of a statistician is. which is going to help you, because with the knowledge that I gained when I was in Canada as with my research, that helped me design and develop projects for this NGO in Gujarat. Because the NGO in Gujarat, I was the only person who had fair bit of knowledge about research. So it was my own learning and my own knowledge that helped evaluate these different projects that are going on with the NGO. And that knowledge came from my postgraduate studies in Canada. So start small, just like me, research assistant, voluntary positions, just help your teaching staff or your research staff at ARIP with some projects, just to get some knowledge, right? So it can be a voluntary position, then you go for a part-time, not paid well. If you're working with NGOs, don't expect too much of a good pay or good money. Pursue courses. There are a lot of courses that are available online for free through edX and what's the other one, Coursera. So you could try to do some statistical courses now that probably you're still stuck at home and things haven't your usual uni cycle hasn't started. So this is the time to hone your statistical skills. Internships, as I already talked about, try to get into projects in community research. Now, variations to this role, research manager is kind of a position one up to the research officer. Research fellow. So I was working as a research fellow here at one of the institutes in Sydney prior to taking up my PhD position at the University of Sydney. I was working as a research fellow with this organization. That was quite a short stint, but it involved community projects in India. So that institute was doing a lot of work with institutes in India. So I was talking about cross-continent collaboration. So that was an example. And I was working in the position of a research fellow and a graduate research scholar. So that's probably my current position as a PhD student. So if you're pursuing your graduate studies and you're also working on some research projects, so that title is advertised as a graduate research scholar. So there are a lot of options to explore under research as well. Consultant positions with government organizations and NGOs. So I am holding some consultant positions with NGOs in India. One such position is with the NGO in Gujarat. In Maharashtra, yes, I was talking about earlier with the grant from Office of Global Engagement from the University of Sydney. So that's an example of a consultatory position. Um, so working with NGOs, although the pay is not very good, but that's an excellent area to improve your knowledge and your understanding of how you could contribute to public health or community projects. So that's a nice, neat way to improve your knowledge. So when you're just passing your undergraduate program, or passing out from your from your final year or finishing your internship, um, such opportunities are nice to begin with. So maybe you take up a position in a hospital, but you could also look for other options with NGOs or other research institutes that are looking for volunteers, maybe, or even part-time research assistants. So that's a good way to improve your knowledge outside, outside physiotherapy, but related, but outside physiotherapy. Well, I guess I'm at the last part. Again, I would like to express my deep gratitude to Dr. Bala, Dr. Dave, and their team at ARIP. It's always wonderful to to see the kind of innovation and the kind of different techniques that Dr. Bala and his team keep using in order to keep you students interested. I must say that that's not often seen yet in other parts of the country. So your students are really privileged to be in a research in a physio institute like that. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to have this webinar and interact with your students. I was really looking forward to this. I would like to thank my supervisory team at the University of Sydney in Australia. They've been extremely supportive, very nice. Two of them, I guess, are on the webinar today, Professor Catherine Refshoggi, um, who's a professor of physiotherapy and one of my supervisors, and Dr. Claire Hiller, who is a senior lecturer at the discipline of physiotherapy, who's my primary supervisor, and others in my supervisory team as well who couldn't come to the webinar today. So thank you very much. St. Jude India Childcare Center, so that's the name of the NGO in Mumbai, the Pediatric Oncology NGO. So a lot of learning, especially about Northern India and the state of rural communities there. So it was a very enriching experience working with this NGO. And always deep gratitude to my participants in my research project, especially the students who agreed to take part in the surveys and improve my knowledge of the state of community physiotherapy in India. And I guess it's time for questions if we have any. So let me stop sharing. Yeah.
So you can ask for the questions from the audience.
So we have a question from Purvi. So I'm just reading it out. What are the main roles of community physiotherapists in COVID-19? I think the first role is you should stay safe. Stay safe in the COVID-19. I'm just kidding. Well, there's a lot. There's a lot of things we still we are yet to know about COVID-19. So the way things are working here, I've been attending some seminars organized by the university here with physios who are working in hospitals here. So so the way things are working here is they're using a lot of telehealth because we really don't know how COVID-19 can be curbed yet. So for the staff to stay safe as well, they're using a lot of telehealth where, you know, something like this, what we're doing today. So the physio sits here and tries to assess what's wrong with the, how we can help the patients. But I guess mostly it's acute care now in this phase. But there's a lot of research funding that's available to see the long-term effects of COVID-19. I think that would be a good area to explore once we have more clarity on this. So I'm really not sure what would be the main role, but definitely there would be a lot of contribution that we could do to COVID-19 affected patients. But there still need to be more clarity on what the disease process is and all of that. So there's a question for, thank you Purvi for the question. The next question is from Dr. Dule. So if you can share more on your experience of back pain project with focus group discussion for the newcomers in the field of research. So so do you mean the methodology, Dr. Dule? Is that what you mean? Okay. So the way the focus group discussions work is, firstly, you have to do your review in order to understand what is available for you to understand in that field, right? So get the first, as I said, you know, when I showed you the slide on ICDS, the Integrated Child Development Services, we started from Asia, went to India, and then went to Karnataka. So firstly, if you're doing a focus group with back pain patients in Gujarat, try to find out what evidence is available for back pain patients in Gujarat, which might be very difficult to get. So then you look at India to see what evidence is available. And based on what, I'm pretty sure you would find a lot of evidence in India. So based on those findings, try to develop some questions. There might just be one or two questions or three questions to begin with. And then once you have those questions, when you get your participants ethical clearances and all of that, so when you're running the focus group, there has to be a very open-ended question. Say for example, something like, so if you're looking to explore your the experience of back pain patients in Gujarat, you could just start off with what do you think about back pain, rather than saying, do you think back pain is a big problem? You know, so try to have open-ended questions on what do you think about back pain, and then and you'll be surprised to get so much of information, because the kind of questions that we design, we usually end up um, not addressing all the issues. So when the, say for example, in in one of the focus groups here, when we talked about back pain, and the question was, what do you think about back pain? And one of them said, why are you even studying back pain? Is it that big a problem? So that means that participant did not view back pain as that big a problem. So instead of asking, is that a big problem for you, if you have many open-ended questions, that's going to lead you to the next question. So the follow-up question to this one was, why do you, so the participant said, do you think back pain is a big issue? Why are you studying this? So the next question was, so the next question that I asked was, why is that not troubling you? Or don't you think back pain is a big problem? So rather than giving them answers, you have to have a lot of open-ended questions, and then you'll see that the discussion takes a different route altogether. So start off with very open-ended and basic questions. And the way focus groups work is, you do a couple of focus groups, do some data analysis to see if it's answering your questions, the aims of your project. And if it doesn't, then you have to tweak the focus group guide and conduct future focus groups until you start getting the same answers. So that is when you stop. That is termed as saturation in qualitative research. So that is when you stop. So I hope that answers your question, Dr. Dave, but I'll be quite happy to chat with you because I've got a lot of, I've had the privilege of having a very good set of mentors who have helped me with qualitative research, because it's the first time I have been doing this. So I'll be more than happy to discuss this with you if that helps. So if I can move on to the next question by Nirali. Can you please share major diversity you observed in communities from different states of India? That's a great question. So the diversity, firstly, it comes from the language. So the different languages that they speak. So the interpretation of, um, so there are certain words in which are interpreted differently in different languages of India. That was one of the learnings for me. That is why the validation studies are very important. Going back to what I was talking about, um, um, what I was talking about. Thanks, Kathy. uh, what I was talking about. So the validation is very important for that reason, because the way people in different parts of the country interpret a question is very different. So the kind of answers that you'd get to the same question is very different. That's why you need to validate, say, a questionnaire in English into individual Indian languages for use in different parts of the country. So that's one major difference that I found in different languages, because you would assume, so when I'm talking in English, uh, the understanding is quite similar. Like I'm trying to say something and you're understanding it probably the same way that we all are. But when you do the same thing in an Indian language, the response that you get is very different. So that's one of the major diversities that I observed among the different communities. And the other difference that I've seen, say for example, I can talk about Maharashtra and Gujarat because that's where I have worked more. So in Maharashtra, the way people view community physiotherapy is quite different to the way it's viewed in Gujarat. So it depends on, the kind of public health campaigns or the awareness about community physiotherapy in different states. It's nothing to do with the profession per se, but so the way you approach the communities is very different. So the NGO in Gujarat, it didn't introduce me as a community physiotherapist because they wouldn't understand what that role is. But he said that this is someone coming from Mumbai and she's worked in different hospitals. So the word hospital kind of interested them in my talk, because that would mean I'm a medical person and probably I can help them, or I have the expertise in helping them with their back pain. So the way you communicate with different communities in different parts of the country depends on their knowledge or their awareness about your profession, and ultimately what your aim is with that community. So these were the major differences that I observed in two states. I must say I haven't had a lot of exposure in other parts of the country, but these are the two states where I have worked the most. Thank you for your question. That's a wonderful question that in itself talks about how diverse India is, despite being the same country. So you have to be very careful in trying to extrapolate findings from one state to the other. Like when we did the study of urban slum children in Maharashtra and Gujarat, the findings were quite different. I think that paper is already published. You could Google and check. But yeah, so coming from different parts of the states of the country changes their perception, their awareness, also depending on which part of the state they are from. So if they are from a very progressive part of the state, like closer to a city, closer to a major metropolitan city, then their awareness is very different. So the way you introduce yourself, or the way you handle that community, or a focus group with that community would change. I hope that answers your question, Nirali.
Thank you, Dr. Pavitra Rajan. It was wonderful to have you once again back-to-back sessions for our institute university. And thanks for giving your time today. Is there any comments from your Professor Grad? Would like to have any comments?
Kathy had to leave. There's Claire.
There is the,
Sorry, just trying to find my things. Thank you very much for letting me join in and listen to Pavi and to hear be able to see all the things she's been doing with in India. And also it's fascinating to listen to advice given to physiotherapy students, which doesn't seem to vary very much throughout the world. So I think you did a great job, Pavi, and I really enjoyed being able to listen.
thank you, Claire, for being in this session. And so as there are no questions, so I'd like to thank Pavitra and then the University of Sydney, where she was part of it for this webinar, and hope the insights given by her, which will help the physiotherapists in India to explore in the field of community and to come with the flying colors. One comment I just want to add upon with Pavitra is that a lot of opportunities are there in the community. Still, there is, as you said, the lack of awareness and then lack of mentorship. So, which will, I think we are trying to work on in some of the areas which could build up to work on with those things. And even the international NGO, you are talking about the more of the NGOs in the India. Even the international NGOs, they have got a lot of opportunities. And still, there is a way, the pathway has to be shown to the children for the future of it. Still, I think we will work it out to make it sure that the opportunities will be shown to them, then choices them to choose whatever they want to do it. And so we'll work for it. And thank you for your insights. And thanks to all the participants who have been here. And I'd like to end the session once again. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All the best. Bye.